Publications India, Institute of South Asia Studies, National University of Singapore, and Mr. Vinod Rai, I extend a very warm welcome to each one of you to the launch of Transforming the Steel Frame, Promise and Paradox of Civil Service Reform, edited by Mr. Vinod Rai. I would now like to introduce our distinguished guests this evening, Dr. S. Jaishankar, Honorable Minister of External Affairs, Government of India, Mr. Amitabh Kant, G20 Shaper of India and former CEO Niti Aayog, Associate Professor Iqbal Singh Sevia, Director, Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, Dr. Prajapati Trivedi, Commonwealth Secretary General's Special Envoy for SDG Implementation and Distinguished Professor, School of Public Policy and Governance, MDI. Mr. Vinod Rai, Distinguished Visiting Senior Research Fellow, Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, and the editor of the book, and Mr. Kapish Mehra, Managing Director, Rupa Publications India. I would now like to invite Mr. Kapish Mehra, Managing Director, Rupa Publications India, for the publisher's address.
Thank you, Yamini. Am I audible? Is this? I think before I get into the formalities, the one institution we need to thank more than the university in Singapore is the Habitat Center. And not because today's event is complimentary, but because the idea for this book was conceived right here over a non-alcoholic lunch, which I was, hosted to by Mr. Vinod Rai. So it is to IHC and to this moment. A very good evening to Honorable Minister, Mr. Kant, Iqbalji, Prajapatiji, our distinguished author Vinod Rai, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The lunch led to a question which was a question that a lot of people, a lot of young Indians, aspirational youth ask: what's wrong with us and why can't we fix it? And that one question kept sort of bothering him, and he kept thinking about it, and it kind of folded well into what he was doing at Singapore. But the interesting thing is the subtitle, because promise and paradox are two words that don't find themselves placed next to each other very often. And the reason it is a promise as well as a paradox is paradox obviously because of the question, what's wrong? And promise because on a government holiday, when the External Affairs Minister of the country lines up 5 minutes before a scheduled book launch, that's promise. So thank you, sir, for gracing the occasion. But so is the promise. So while there is hope, there are questions, and it is better for people who have served and retired or continue to serve, and some who don't wish to serve, to answer rather than the publisher to further interpret the situation. I just want to thank Mr. Rai for giving us the opportunity, the privilege to publish this book. It's the fourth one with us. And needless to say, each one of them have gone on to become bestsellers. Some of them have attracted a lot of media attention, a few cases, but he's never shied away from saying the truth and actually being blunt about it. So I'm glad that we have somebody amongst us who says as he sees it, and I'm glad that this journey continues, and I hope, sir, that after the steel frame there is something else as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kapish. I I would now like to invite Professor Iqbal Singh Sevia, Director, Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, for the opening remarks.
Dr. S. Jayashankar, Minister of External Affairs, Mr. Amitabh Kant, Sherpa of India and former Chief Executive Officer, Niti Aayog, Mr. Vinod Rai, Distinguished Visiting Research Fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, Dr. Prajapati Trivedi, Commonwealth Secretary General's Special Envoy on SDG Implementation, and Distinguished Professor, School of Public Policy and Governance, Management Development Institute, India, Mr. Kapish Mehra, Managing Director, Rupa Publications, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, I welcome you to the book launch, Transforming the Steel Frame, Promises and Paradox of Civil Service Reform, edited by Mr. Vinod Rai. We're honored to have with us today Dr. S. Jayashankar and Mr. Vinod Kant, with Amitabh Kant, to do the honors. Dr. Jayashankar and Mr. Kant, thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedules, that too on a public holiday, to be part of this event. Your presence here is deeply appreciated. Now, I'm not going to preempt any of the discussions that we're actually here to listen to, but I'll just say a little bit about how we should approach this book and the importance of it. Since 1947, the Civil Services of India has been charged with facilitating good governance and enabling the development of the country. The civil service is conceived as a continuous element in all administrations that functions with impartiality and a sense of permanence. Effectively, the Indian bureaucracy was modeled to play the role of a permanent steel framework which actualizes policy decisions. In a country as richly diverse as India, and one which has a federal structure, the civil service was also seen as a means of strengthening cohesion and national unity. Indeed, it has been described as an important bridge between the center and the states. Over the decades, the bureaucracy has played an important role in developing institutions and shaping the socio-economic and political development of India. Take, for instance, the fact that the Indian bureaucracy has been pivotal in enabling India to remain the largest democracy in the world. Apart from the massive logistics operations this involves, this has also necessitated the bureaucracy asserting and negotiating its independence from political interference. However, there is a sense that the civil service is in need of structural reforms to enable it to contribute effectively to India's development. It has been suggested that a bureaucracy's resistance to change detracts from flexible and people-oriented administration. Such concerns have fueled discussions around the need for a series of reforms ranging from decluttering to adopting new recruitment methods to broadening the paradigm shifts in the way the civil services are conceived. On its part, the Indian government has attempted to address some of these by taking steps to improve the bureaucracy's efficiency and effectiveness. Does this book, I hope that was not a response to what I'm saying, but does this book come at an opportune moment? It brings together former civil servants, eminent personalities from the corporate sector, and members of the civil society to reflect on the strengths and weaknesses of the Indian civil services, areas they need to reform, and mechanisms through which these improvements can be made. The book discusses the key challenges involved in reforming the civil services, such as the recruitment process and the famous debate over whether the civil services should focus on training bureaucrats to be specialists versus generalists. It also looks at issues such as aptitude assessments for promotions to ensure optimal efficiency across the services, and dealing with corruption and accountability, among others. The bureaucracy in India comprises some of India's most talented, and their contributions are essential to the country's policy making and development. Thus, it is no surprise that discussions around the evolution of the civil services continue to be a critical part of public and policy discourse. It is in the light of this that this book, Transforming the Steel Frame, Promises and Paradox of Civil Services Reform, has been published, and I thank Mr. Rai and the group of esteemed contributors for putting the book together. At the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, we seek to promote an understanding of developments in South Asia and to communicate knowledge and insights about it to academia, students, policymakers, the business community, and civil society in Singapore and beyond. As a part of one of the world's leading universities in the Institute of South Asian Studies, particularly looks forward to continuing to be a space to discuss and develop knowledge on India. And today's book launch is an important effort in this regard. My colleagues and I from ISAS are delighted to be part of this book launch, and I thank you all for joining us today, and I wish all of us a productive and enriching evening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to invite Mr. Vinod Rai, Distinguished Visiting Research Fellow, ISAS, and the editor of the book, for his introductory remarks.
Thank you, Yamini. Shankar, who normally we hear and see in places other than this country and this city. Thank you very much for gracing this occasion today. Mr. Amitabh Kant has just come back from Kumarakom after hosting a G20 meeting from there. Amitabh, lovely to see you here. Dr. Prajapati Trivedi, Dr. Irfan Sevia, Kapish, distinguished friends. The most difficult task, for which Kapish has taken a lot of credit, it did take birth over here. But if I had written the book that Kapish wanted me to write, probably a couple of more defamation cases would have been filed against me. So I thought better of him, because first thing he makes you do is sign the thing saying that legally the publisher will not be held responsible for anything that is contained in the book. So the instinct of self-preservation prevailed, and I stayed away from it. Well, subject, parliamentary democracy. All parliamentary democracies have a permanent civil service. It's supposed to be the mainframe, call it the structure, call it the scaffolding, whatever it is. We prefer to call it the steel frame. The steel frame is permanent. Governments come, governments kind of flavor, the complexion of governments, its pigmentation changes from time to time, but the civil service stays on. But over a period of time, the steel frame begins to at times sag, at times corrode, and then there is need for further strengthening that steel frame. Administration over years is becoming far more complex, and you need to reskill the people who constitute that steel frame. And that's why we've had administrative reforms commissions, 2 of them. We've had any number of committees, but probably the best thing that the government did was 2020, they launched what is otherwise known as Mission Karmyogi. Mission Karmyogi, if I could give you some idea about what was it engages to prepare Indian civil service for the future by making them more creative, constructive, imaginative, innovative, proactive, professional, progressive, transparent, and technology-enabled. Which lots of us, especially even me, until that time I retired, I didn't know how to type. We always had assistants, so we managed without typing. Now, it is recognized and all over that the bureaucracy needs to be in some ways provided with an administrative capacity which will deal with the times. So we in ISAS, Iqbal, myself and all of us, my colleague Amitabh is also here today, we started thinking about this mission that the government had launched and thought that we must perform some role in it also. So we began to analyze why this so-called steel frame today is more revived, and even if it gets any accolades, it's very cautious kind of accolades that it receives. Why is it that a steel frame, which was so celebrated once upon a time, has now become either laggard or laid back in some ways? When we did research, we found some descriptions of what you can call a civil service. And one which I'd like to read is by a professor or an author called Frank Herbert. Frank has written a science fiction book, series of books he's written. Heretics of Dune is one, in which he describes the bureaucracy. And this is global. He says, bureaucracy destroys initiative. There is little that bureaucrats hate more than innovation, especially innovations that produce better results than the old routines. And Mission Yogi talks about innovation. Bureaucrats are, and this is what he goes on to say, bureaucrats are rigid, negative, close-minded, unresponsive, working to a fixed routine without exercising intelligent judgment. That's how he defines all of us. But talking about Indian bureaucracy, ex-President Barack Obama has written in his book, Promised Land, he says, Indian bureaucracy is hamstrung by a parochial bureaucracy that was resistant to change. And I think that is what we seem to be addressing now. So we decided that we will bring together an amalgam of distinguished personalities, people who are from the bureaucracy itself, and people from outside who have dealt with the government and have some experience with the government. So we got together people like a former UPSC chairman, Deepak is with us here today, former director, the Lal Bahadur Shastri, the is present here today, secretaries in government, information commissioners, election commissioners, the vigilance commissioner, all of whom are present here today, to give us some ideas of what and how they would like to see governments change. We got together people from the corporate sector, distinguished people like Mr. Ramadurai from TCS, former TCS, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, you all know her. Then there is Naina Kidwai, who run a few banks. People, distinguished people like them. We got a couple of international civil servants. We got Dr. Trivedi, who teaches, though he is about 100 years younger than me, he taught me in Harvard. And he's ashamed of saying so that he taught me. I don't know what's the reason, but anyway, that's what he said. And we found that, yes, there is a bureaucracy. There will be political interference. We can't wish it away. We can't shy away from it. There will be, in the bureaucracy, as it is being done now, a proliferation of lateral entrants, specializing in their own way. We can't say that they are going to be spoiling the culture of the bureaucracy. And there will be insidious attempts to damage the moral fiber of that bureaucracy. So there is need to create a genre of people, a distinguished lot of people, present-day administrators, who will deal with present-day problems, unlike what, say, not so much Amitabh, but for me, 50 years back, 52 years back, when we joined the service, things were very different. So present-day administrators who will deal with present-day problems and skill them with present-day techniques to handle this. And that's what I think the mission is all about, and we thought we will contribute to it. Now, what has finally emerged in the book from all the authors who have contributed to is an excellent bouquet of suggestions, recommendations that have come forth from people who have worked with the government. Remarkable things like Kiran, she works in Bangalore on urban infrastructure. Naina Kidwai, her team works in Jharkhand on rural issues, and water supply, sanitation, etc. is all that we deal with. We have a distinguished journalist with us, Shubhamoy. Shubhamoy has talked about local self-governments and how they have been running or need to be running. So that bouquet of excellent recommendations have emerged, and though I would not like to deep dive into these things, because I think we need to do justice to Kapish, his book must be sold and people should buy them and read them. But what has emerged is that a participative, collaborative approach is essential today's citizen, today's young man is very much more discerning. He is very much more demanding. He wants to participate in administration, and he has the skill sets to collaborate and produce more productive, better results in governance. So the main thing is that the core strength of the bureaucracy, the civil service or the setup in government will have to be integrity. Ethical governance is an edifice on which only any sustainable economic development over a long period of time can take place. And that ethical element in the civil service is something which we did not join the civil service merely for a career. You are joining it to render service. And that service element is something which cannot allow you to stray away from the path. And that's why I call it service that we render. And that is the role that needs to be emphasized, that from day one, it has to be instilled in the DNA of the young person who is joining the service. Now, I don't want to say too much on this, but on responsive administration, I will end by giving an example. This was 2017, and courtesy the Supreme Court, I was masquerading as a cricket administrator. This was March, or was it April 2017. And the Australian team was playing test matches in India. And as you all know, and after that, the IPL had to follow. And as you all know, we allow 4 foreign players to play in any IPL team at any single point of time. That particular year, 67 foreign players were playing in the IPL of 2017. 21 of them were Australians. And this team was already here. Now, IPL was to follow in 7 or 8 days' time. Government of India took the decision that these guys, these Australian players, have been given visas for only the test matches. And if they needed visas for the IPL, they would have to go back to Australia, apply for a visa, get the visa, and come back again. So that the entire gap of 7 days would have been covered, flying over oceans. The issue landed up on my desk. So I realized, and any one of us who retires from the government realizes only after you retire, that the most important person in government is the undersecretary. So I started calling the undersecretary. He gave me his gyan. I called the deputy secretary. He gave me further gyan. And I called the joint secretary. And I said, well, rules are rules, buddy. You have also been in government. You should appreciate them. I said, yes, you have a very valid point. I do appreciate that. Then I said, now what do I do? So one chance I tried, I rang up the External Affairs Secretary, the Foreign Secretary. And lo and behold, he came onto the line, which doesn't happen in Government of India ever. You ring up a landline and the PA will say, मैं check करता हूँ साहब है कि नहीं है, अच्छा अपना number छोड़ दिया, I'll call you back. And then he'll call you back if he deems it necessary. Well, the Foreign Secretary came online. I explained to him what the problem, and I preambled it by saying, look, sorry, I'm using a huge mallet to kill a small fly, but my problem is visas for these guys. He said, why? No-brainer. Why should they go back? Okay, anyway. And within about 60 minutes after that, the Joint Secretary, the Deputy Secretary, and the Under Secretary started calling me. Visas were issued. The Australian team didn't have to come back, and the then Foreign Secretary is with us today, Dr. S. Jaishankar. It was not the visas that mattered. my clout in the BCCI went up 100-fold. And that's what mattered. That's what mattered. So anyway, so this is an example of responsible administration on a simple issue. And it had to be escalated to the level of a secretary. Anyway, so thank you very much for gracing the occasion today. It is exceedingly kind of you, because I kept harassing his Deputy Secretary Raghu, who's here, saying that Raghu, I must get, because the Institute says so, and all of us want to hear the Minister, and he must come for the event. So we waited, and he was gracious, as I said earlier. Today is a holiday, but he's condescended to be with us. We had young Amitabh. I'll say young because he's about, if not 150 years younger than me, who's just come back from a very successful G20 meeting in Kumarakom in Kerala. And I don't know about the deliberations because they were all closed doors, but it was only Amitabh who could have changed the entire look of what Kumarakom was. We need to go and rediscover it. But Amitabh, thank you very much for being here with us today. I need to thank the Institute of South Asian Studies also. Professor Taeyong, who is the chairman of the institute, is not here today, but we conceptualized the idea and he gave support in saying that yes, we need to come out with this kind of a thing, which hopefully, and my batchmates are here, we are traveling to Mussoorie tomorrow for Golden Jubilee celebrations. Hopefully, this book will be given, presented to the Academy also, for whatever it will be worth. And then I thank, of course, Kapish and Yamini. Kapish is the headmaster, he's the principal and Yamini is the headmaster. And they've got a couple of other teachers, Vasundhara, Pitu and all those people are here, who fix timelines, and they've always treated me like one of those straggling youngsters who sits in the last bench and says, "Kya ho gaya? Ek hafte pehle aapko lana tha." And you write and take something to them and say, "This is what you've written? This looks reads like a noting on a file, on a government file." Then you go back and start again all over again. So it has been wonderful working with Kapish and his team. I need, of course, to thank my family and my wife also, who allowed me to sit before a desktop and keep punching away. Though I have this lurking suspicion that she'd rather see me there so that she can spend more time on the golf course. And she doesn't play golf too often, it's only about 8 days in the week that she plays. So it has been a wonderful effort from the Institute, from all the contributors, to whom I owe thanks for this book. What's the worth? You will decide. So I present you this book for a good read. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to request Dr. Prajapati Trivedi, Commonwealth Secretary General Special Envoy for SDG Implementation and Distinguished Professor, School of Public Policy and Governance, MDI, to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaishankar, Mr. Vinod Rai, Mr. Amitabh Kant, Professor Iqbal, Mr. Kapish Mehra, ladies and gentlemen. It's truly a pleasure, and after what Mr. Vinod Rai has said that I taught him, I am speechless. There are many others here, and so I need to justify what that statement meant. When I started teaching, most of my students were older than me. And in fact, my teacher at St. Stephen's was also my student, who shall remain unnamed. And it was a major challenge because these were wise people who had made it to the IAS, were doing well, and they were sitting there, and I, as a young person, had to deal with all that. So you may be wondering, so what does an economist have to do with administrative reform? That's the next logical question. So let me tell you how this goes. There is a story about economics some of you might have heard, so I apologize for that, and that goes something like this. They said that economics is like looking for a black cat in a dark room. Within economics, I have actually written a textbook on economic theory, and that, they say, is like a blind man looking for a black cat in a dark room. Within economic theory, some of my friends, my class fellows are here, will testify that I specialize in econometrics, which is like a blind man looking for a black cat in a dark room and the cat is not even there. But believe it or not, they asked me to join the government. And I was made Secretary of Performance Management. And that people found very hard to believe, and I had to explain that. I had run out of explanation. So then I said, that's a blind man looking for a black cat, and the cat is not even there, and he keeps saying, I've got it, I've got it. So I'm very good at claiming that, I know the answers, I got it. And that's how you survive when you're very wise and people who are, Sanjeev Mishra was there, so you can imagine Mr. Amitabh Kant would remember from St. Stephen's, he was our teacher. So here I am, I have written a chapter, and my task is to really summarize that chapter. That chapter, if those of you who have glanced or would like to glance, really deals with results orientation in the government. And to me that, I've spent all my life, and I continue to do teaching, preaching, only because I believe the answer lies in results orientation. You have to know what you need from the government. You have to know what you need from the steel frame. Maybe a plastic frame is good enough. But if we don't know what we need from the government, if we don't have clarity of expectations, like in Alice in Wonderland, then any road will lead you there. So you can do any kind of reform you want, since you don't know where you're going. So clarifying what is expected, where you're headed, then everything starts to fall in place. To me it is, I have also taught at the academy in the foundation course, the full course in Mussoorie. I found them to be the brightest people. Some of them, not some, I think most of them were smarter than people at Harvard, my students there. So I don't find any problem with the people. Millions of people apply, a handful are taken, and then we complain that we have a capacity problem. Capacity is not a problem. The problem that we have is our system. And we should not really blame, with due apologies to Deepak Gupta is sitting here and he disagrees actually in his chapter. But I believe that's really not, we are selecting, we are not building rockets and sending people on the moon in civil service, so you don't need that kind of people. What we are getting is good enough. People is not an issue, in my personal opinion. It is the system, and it's not my view. Peter Drucker, who is a very famous management scientist, has said that 80% of the outcome of any organization depends on the quality of system and the 20% on the people. And he further goes on, and it's not my view, all management experts tend to agree, that out of that 20% share of the people, 80% is attributable to leadership. So all you need is a good leader and a great system. You can do miracles. After all, Ashoka the Great, Alexander the Great, they had great systems, great leaders. Do you remember the names of the rank and file? I don't. So rank and file rises up to the occasion. That has been my experience. I worked for World Bank for many years. When I used to go to countries and the ministers would get very upset, they said, Prof, each time you come here, you ask for our brightest people, and how are we supposed to do our work when you take away our good people? So I changed my strategy. I used to go to countries, meet the Minister of Finance and say, Your Excellency, can you give me your worst people, which will not cause you any harm? And they turn out to be some of the best people. You treat them with love, affection, you put them in a system, you tell them what the benefits and costs of your action and non-actions are. They rise up to the occasion and deliver. So I have yet to find really people. Look at ourselves. I'm a mediocre Indian. I went abroad. I did well, not because of my ability, because of the system. So my chapter deals with efforts of the government of India in trying to develop a results-oriented system. And there were 2 tenures I've had in government. In both, I worked on the results-oriented system. In the first tenure, I worked as economic advisor in the Department of Public Enterprises, where my charge was to set up the Memorandum of Understanding. I mean, you remember 1991, we were bankrupt, IMF had taken our gold, so as part of the conditionality, it was that either you shape up or you privatize all these public enterprises. So government decided to shape up, and that experience, I will not bore you here, you can read the book, was fabulous. Public enterprises turned around because they were given a simple, very clear task. They were entered into performance contracts with their secretaries and their ministers, where 50% of the weight was on financial performance. 7 years after that, they were given bonuses also. It just lit the fire in the belly, and you know they were transformed. I wish we had PowerPoint to show you the data, the steep lines for all the indicators. The sector as a whole, there are exceptions, but the sector as a whole was making so much money that the government had to go begging to some of these public enterprises, please park your money with us, give us the money. So the situation can be turned around. So, like Martin Luther King says, I've been on the hilltop and I've seen the other side. So I've seen that it's possible. Now that I work for the Commonwealth Secretariat, 54 countries are working. So it is a completely global proposition, making results orientation. The problem is it's very hard in the government to find results. That I grant, but it's not impossible. I mean, after all, you know, in government, my experience was I would go talk to a secretary. The secretary would say, look, they would start by saying that we are unique. Agriculture is very unique. The whole India depends on agriculture. What do you mean performance of agriculture? You can't evaluate. It's like performance of God. I'm God. I'm water. I'm health. I'm this. What do you mean you've come here to talk about my performance? With due respect, since the minister is here, I have to be very. The ministries which are toughest, not in India, but in New Zealand and others, for performance management are external affairs. They say that, what do you mean, our performance? We save the blue whale and we do things, and you can measure those things? Impossible. So that's the limit. Everybody, including the Prime Minister of Bhutan, says that the last ministry to fall in place was the Ministry of External Affairs, because it's so hard to define their performance, but not impossible. So let me just summarize and end, because one of the perils of inviting a teacher is just that, you know, no class is 10 minutes. Right? It has to be a longer class. But if you want a class of 10 minutes, it just is a reflection on what sort of teacher you think I am. But nonetheless, I'll say this. The central challenge, now that I have worked across the globe on these things, problems pretty much, if you close your eyes, you think bureaucrats in all countries are conspiring to tell you the same story. It's so transcendental. We think we are unique. But you go to a small country, which is Tuvalu, you know, 10,000 people only. It's a Commonwealth island state. Or Kiribati, or any of these countries. They'll tell you the same problems. So the problem is, essentially, I'll tell you the most important problem and the most important solution, and not bore you with the rest. The most important problem that they say is, sir, we have multiple principles with multiple objectives, and hence we don't know what is expected from us. You know, everybody thinks they have a right to supervise a government department. With due apologies, whether it is the CAG, CBC here, we have Pradeep Kumar, CBC, or anyone, you know, Parliament, standing committees, everybody comes looking for performance from their point of view. Somebody wants equity, somebody wants efficiency. These are goals that can't be reconciled in some cases. So as a result, the civil servants do not know what is really expected from them. If they run fast, you are told, look, this is not a dash, it's a marathon, take it easy, don't run so fast. If they jump high, they're told, look, who told you this is a high jump? It's a broad jump, man, you have to go very far. Don't just jump so high. So whatever they do there, so therefore they realize in this system, the best thing is to lie low, let the clouds go over, and then just smile and walk over. Right? That is really the attitude, how to be a survivor rather than a doer, because whatever you do, someone will question. And that is not a good situation. This is what we tried to change. It's not my personal view. In fact, I had to resign from the World Bank to come and join the government. But I joined because I thought the cause was worth it. And the cause was the Administrative Reform Commission and the Central Pay Commission both had recommended, Central Pay Commission in 1986, the fourth Pay Commission recommended, look, we are increasing your salaries, and I'm a beneficiary. I was a professor at time in Calcutta, my salaries went up. We are giving you high salaries only on one condition, that you must have a performance-related incentive scheme. Fourth Pay Commission was in 1986. Seventh Pay Commission submitted its report 2 years back. Fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, they have been shouting that you guys just increase your salaries immediately, but what about the performance-related incentive? That part has not been implemented, but everything else, all the perks, privileges have been accepted from the CPC. And I think that, in fact, I remember I was still in the government when the 7th Pay Commission asked me for evidence. Well, I went up to them and I told them this is what has happened. The members of the commission said, my God, we will not wait for the report to be completed. We will issue an interim report asking the government to have a performance-related incentive scheme. So this is a challenge in the government, but a completely doable challenge. And unless we solve this, we'll have a situation that 3 people looking at the government come to 3 different conclusions, same department. It's like, just imagine you go to a hospital with a sick patient, I mean, the department is a sick patient, and 3 doctors come and one says he's got malaria, he says he's got diphtheria, he's got cancer or something. And they start giving medicine. What will happen to the patient? Whatever life was there is not likely to remain if you give so much medicine. So I think our challenge in the country is, and that's what I argue in my chapter, that we must be clear what we expect and then talk about the medicine we need to give. And there are many medicines that are available, but we should not give medicine just because it happens to be part of our toolkit. Medicine should be given to a patient who needs that medicine. But unless we know they have a barometer, a tool to figure out whether the patient is sick or healthy, I'm afraid we'll keep, like Neem Hakim, you go there and he says, he looks sick. I think he has got this. And from the looks you get something. And that's how we are treating many of our government departments and bureaucracy, and hence not making progress. If we have to make progress, we must be clear what we want, and then it will follow. These are very bright people, the brightest of the bright, and they will deliver. That is, as I said, once again, to repeat, that in civil service we are not sending men on the moon. It's very simple. But we need to know where we are going, and they will deliver. Thank you very much. That's the essence. For the rest, you read the book. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to invite Mr. Amitabh Kant, G20 Sherpa of India and former CEO Niti Aayog, to address the gathering.
Mr. Jaishankar, the Honorable Minister, Mr. Vinod Rai, Mr. Prajapati Trivedi, who's taught me in college, St. Stephen's, and Mr. Kapish Mehra, Iqbal, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. When I first landed up in Kerala as a young probationer, there were hardly any North Indian officers there. We'd taken this Kerala Express train journey, 48 hours to land up in Kerala, and that was the time when Kerala was just full of trade unions. You couldn't even carry your luggage. There was something called Noku Kuli, that you had to give money to the union leader even to carry your own bag. But one of the refreshing things of Kerala that time was that Mr. Vinod Rai was there. He really took care of all the probationers, at least all the North Indian probationers. And I think I owe him a deep debt, and I thought the only way to repay him back was to be a panelist at this book release. Soon after in Kerala, after I finished my subdivision, one of the jobs which I got from the then Chief Minister was to transform the lives of traditional fishermen in Kerala. And actually for 3.5 years, my job was to enhance their productivity, give them outboard motors, give them new fishing nets, which were then known as disco nets, give them new fiberglass crafts. We also introduced beach level auctions. But opening their bank accounts then was a nightmare. It used to take us 7-8 months chasing physical bank managers, to know your customer was a nightmare. Today, since then, as I look back, today we are able to open a bank account in less than a minute using the biometrics. So the transformational journey of India really has been from about 8 months then to 1 month, and less than a minute. And soon then after, actually I ran foul of the communist government in Kerala, and I was kept without a posting for about 7-8 months. I was without a posting. I thought that was the end of my career. And Kerala was then unheard of as a tourism destination, and as a punishment posting, the communist government made me secretary tourism. Thought that there was nothing else this guy can do, no trouble. So I used that opportunity really to build Kerala as a great brand, God's own country, opened up backwaters, created houseboats, really built Ayurveda as a great product, many other things, and Kerala really developed. So my experience, as I go back and I look back a little bit, when this government came here, I was Secretary DIPP, and the first presentation that I made to Mr. Modi, India at that time was 142 in ease of doing business with the World Bank. The first instruction I got was that scrap all these rules, regulations and procedures, and we went about it very systematically. And we, from 79 positions we jumped up in the next 3 years simply because we cleaned up all the rules, regulation and digitized everything. And our basic belief was that India has made itself very difficult, very complex, very tough for private sector to do business in, and therefore we were able to do many things. And in my last job as Niti Aayog, one of the things which we did, transformational jobs which we did, was the Aspirational District Program, which was about transforming lives of citizens in 112 of the most backward districts of India. But the Prime Minister never called them backward, he called them the aspirational districts. And this was about getting real-time data from the districts on 49 outcomes, putting this data on a regular basis, month by month, on a delta, that is how the districts have transformed based on the previous month's performance, and ranking them, and naming and shaming them, and putting this performance out in public domain. So many districts radically improved on all these indicators, and actually all 112 districts improved simply because there were outcomes, there was ranking, there was good performance was rewarded, there was naming and shaming, all through. And therefore my belief is that what the administrative service provides to transform India, no other service ever provides, no other place you will get this opportunity to transform India like this service does. Also, my belief is that the next 75 years will be very different from the past 75 years of what we've been through. And therefore, the civil service has to be geared for another era, totally another era, which to my mind will be an era of, we need to focus on very clear outcomes. We need to focus a lot on data. Data for development will really be the key. We need to focus on digitization, where India has made remarkable progress. I mean, what India has done is simply astounding in the field of digitization. I mean, we do 11x more payment than America or US, what US and Europe do. We do 4x more fast payments than what China does. We do about 42% of the real-time fast payments in the world today. Look at what Diksha, Swayam, all these education thing we could do, 2.5 billion COVID vaccinations during the COVID period. So what India has achieved has been truly remarkable. And I think a lot of credit should really go to the administration to hold India together, to be able to do elections and keep India as a great democracy throughout, and to do transformational work during a major pandemic like the COVID. Having said that, I must also say that there's a lot which needs to be done, particularly in the social sectors of education, health, nutrition, because my belief is that it will be very difficult for India to grow at rapid rates of 8 to 9% per annum, which is really the challenge of the next 3 decades, that India needs to accelerate the pace of its growth. Other countries like Korea, South Korea, China, Taiwan, Singapore, all have achieved these rates of growth for 3-decade period. And that's what India has grown at those rates, but for a very brief period. And if India needs to grow at those rates, the bureaucracy which has been constrained by vast rules and regulations must be the key agent of change, of doing away with these rules, regulations, and procedures, and ensure that there is no form which is more than 5 to 6 columns, must ensure that there are no laws which are more than 2 pages, must ensure that there are no regulations which are more than 1 page, and that is simply, and ensure that no human, no citizen of this country gets in touch physically with any government officer. It's all a digital touch, which will enable India to grow. It must also ensure that government gets out of business. We are too possessive about continuing to hold on to our public sector. Bureaucracy must ensure that its job is to be a facilitator, a catalyst, and to be a driver of growth. And the private sector must be the agent of creating wealth. And therefore, my belief always has been that this is the revolution which Indian bureaucracy must bring in and drive India to a high trajectory growth for the next 3 to 4 decades. And this would require a completely new mindset, a new mindset which will be focused on outcomes, which will be focused on data, which will be focused on putting all these rankings of states. We are a very large country. We are bigger than 25 countries of Europe. And the only way to do it is through competitive federalism. Put out the rankings of states, make them compete, ensure that these states are named and shamed in terms of performance. Like I think in many other areas we've done this already. And therefore my belief is that bureaucracy has to become the biggest agent of change. This book is remarkable for many top-class write-ups, many essays, and I think it's a great addition to taking India forward. And I am a great believer that if India is to be driven forward it's the economic growth which will give you all the power. The hard power of India, the soft power of India is a function of our economic growth. And it's necessary that the bureaucracy becomes a key agent of both growth and change in India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to request the dignitaries present on stage to release the book. I would now like to invite Dr. S. Jaishankar, Honorable Minister of External Affairs, to address the gathering.
Mr. Vinod Rai, Amitabh, Dr. Prajapati Trivedi, Professor Iqbal Singh Sevia, Kapish, dear friends. I was genuinely interested in coming to the event today because if I were to look at a possible next career, my ambition would be to teach comparative bureaucracy. Comparative bureaucracy as a comparison among bureaucracies of India and between our bureaucracy and those of the rest of the world. So I actually flipped through that book. I was fortunate enough to get an advance copy with a certain degree of interest. So today, the remarks that I would make, in a way, is a kind of outsider, insider, outsider view of bureaucracy. The first outsider is because, as many of you know, I did 41 years in the Indian Foreign Service. And much of those 41 years were outside India. And because they were outside India, there was a certain objectivity and detachment with which I looked at my own system. I was also conscious that the Foreign Service is a very different, I think Dr. Trivedi said every secretary says they are unique. Actually, some services also say they are unique. And it was unique because it's a service which has very little support system when you go out. you are in a foreign environment, you pretty much have to make up things as you go along, and it doesn't have the same structures below it which domestic bureaucracies have. So, looking from a foreign service perspective at the workings of our bureaucracy and then often comparing it with other bureaucracies was itself a learning, and that's the first outsider part which I mentioned. But at the same time, I'm very frankly a very deep insider. I'm an insider partly because I've done 4 postings in the Secretariat. I'm an insider because I'm the son and a brother and a nephew of an IAS officer, a grandson of an accounts officer. I have relatives in pretty much every government service, ranging from railways to education in this country. So even the manner of our growing up in many ways was very much an insider's household, you can say, of a bureaucracy. But then again, 4 years ago, I became an outsider. I became an outsider first by moving into the corporate world, and now by being a politician. Which I know is not necessarily the best liked profession among bureaucrats. So, as you can see, I mean, my own ups and downs have allowed me to get a very, I would say, insightful view of bureaucracy from different vantage points. And that's what I would like to talk about. Now, if I were to put this in the context of history, comparative, international relations in a way, that's where I'm coming from. Every major reform in the modern era of a big nation has seen a reform of the bureaucracy. I mean, the classic case to me is that of Japan, when the Meiji Restoration happened. But if you look at how East Asia grew, Southeast Asia grew, China grew, I mean, a lot of Lee Kuan Yew's Singapore story is actually about bureaucracy. That how does he invent a bureaucracy to take Singapore forward, breaking from the traditions that he had inherited. And I mention this today because, when after 40 years of independence, we discovered, I think all realized that our economic model had run out of steam. That's a very polite way of putting it. And we had then what we call an era of reform, starting in the early 90s. But when we conceptualized reform, we largely saw reform in a very, very limited economic way. It had certainly political and other consequences. It had foreign policy consequences. But the kind of, if I were to compare India's 1990s with, let us say, Japan's 1860s or China's 1970s and 80s, I think a very big difference is the fact that the kind of deep and broad reforms which are done, especially in the bureaucracy, in their respective steel frames, that was something which didn't happen in India. And it is very consequential because today the compulsion on a democracy to deliver is so deep that by simply posting high growth rates as we did for many years after the 1990s, we did not necessarily have the kind of impact on the ground that we should have, we could have. And in my view, and this is a very separate, it's a very different discussion, in my view there were also a lot of national security consequences of the fact that many of the deep strengths and the delivery capabilities we should have had, including, as an example, the neglect of the border infrastructure, these are today actually costing us very heavily. Now, in the period that has passed, democracy has evolved with the needs of the day. What we inherited as essentially a regulatory democracy became very early on a development democracy. In the 50s, 60s, many of you have, 70s have much deeper experience. I only saw it as a kid with my father when he was in charge of community development in the early years of his service. But today, the need to be a welfare a bureaucracy, a tech-centric bureaucracy, and a promotional bureaucracy. I think these are today the transitions that we need to make. And in many ways, those compulsions are what is driving the Mission Karma Yogi, which Mr. Vinod Rai spoke about. He used a certain number of adjectives, it is there in his book. I would use 4 adjectives to describe Mission Karma Yogi. 1, to make the bureaucracy more contemporary. 2, to make it more tech-enabled. 3, to make it more rooted. And 4, to make it more innovative. And if we actually succeed in these 4, we have pretty much defeated the very, I would say, pessimistic description of bureaucracy of Frank Herbert, which Mr. Vinod Rai read out to all of you. Now, Mission Karma Yogi has had different aspects of many of us who are in the government have felt its impact. We see it on training, we see it on the way we evaluate our officers and our personnel. We see it in the targets that are set, in the manner of the speed, the integration, the manner in which bureaucracy works. But I would like to draw attention to the fact that we actually have something called the Capacity Building Commission. And we have a Capacity Building Commission because there is a deep-rooted belief today from the Prime Minister downwards that if we are to really seriously aspire to be a $5 trillion economy in the near term, if we are to make Atmanirbhar Bharat into something more than a slogan, then the state capacity really has to strengthen. And that state capacity strengthening means the very same bureaucracy which is usually beaten upon by everybody outside and sometimes even inside, that bureaucracy must have the ability to aspire, to plan, to design, and obviously to deliver. Now, many of the issues raised in the book, from what I could see from a rapid flip through, these are the natural subjects when we discuss the reform of bureaucracy. And of course, foremost among them is this generalist, specialist debate. And I would say the mainstream thinking today, at least at the top echelons of the government, is we need a sort of a T-shaped model where there's a broad lateral awareness of everything in the domain, but within that awareness, some deep specialization, so that the generalist and the specialist are not a binary choice. They coexist in the shape of a T. The complexity of these times also required this kind of simultaneous, a wider awareness as well as a deeper knowledge. And I would say even within specializations, actually, which I can tell you happens, for example, in a ministry like the Foreign Ministry, even within a specialization, the natural push is then to have a super specialization, which is within the domain, carve out a further set of focus areas. Now, it's also true that we have at the upper level certainly a much more generalized bureaucracy than perhaps the challenges of the times demand. And this is again not rocket science. I mean, it is something which is a subject of active discussion. Should we actually, on the basis of experience, should we stream out people into clusters? I mean, is there a case really for people to rotate among, let us say, national security related ministries? Is there a case to do that with the economic commercial ministries? Is there a case to do that with technology or with education and culture? So this, I think, is one debate. It is important to continue debating it, but it is also important to act on it. And I think to a great degree, from what I can see within the government, a lot of it is changing in that regard. The second debate, of course, is the lateral entrance debate. And of course, this is a classic case of where you stand, depends on where you sit. So I would say there's still a lot of hesitation on this issue. And it's not something I see as decisively settled on the basis of principle. I think there will be trials and errors. There will be people who will point out absolutely remarkable cases of lateral entrance. There will be people grumbling about saying, you can't have people at senior positions who don't know the basics of the business. So I think we'll have to go through that debate and then make it up as we go along. But related to that is actually a very different kind of, I would say, liberalization. And that is really whether the government itself should open itself more to internships. That is it useful, is it necessary, is it helpful, not just for the state, but even for the society, to have younger people who work with the government at entry level, at different levels. Because again, my own limited experience here would be that in many cases such people then carry their knowledge and their experience to other domains which they may do more on a more lasting basis. Now there's the reverse syndrome of that. And the reverse syndrome of that is the inaccessible bureaucrat. The inaccessible bureaucrat, which in a sense Mr. Vinod Rai also spoke about. Inaccessible not just in not coming on the telephone line, but inaccessible in the sense of being really disconnected from the challenges of the real economy or the real society or the real politics, I must say. So there are other worlds out there. There are other worlds with their absolutely legitimate demands and compulsions. And the idea that, in some way that their demands are an interference in the pristine working of bureaucracy, I think we need to put that idea behind us. The bureaucracy is as accountable as anybody else in a democracy for its working. And because there are many other domains, they will have their I would say, rub interface, sometimes even frictions with the bureaucracy. But here I did, it did occur to me, and I know today this is a practice which is being pursued within the government, which is to encourage even a short-term exposure to something outside the government. That if you have, I know some ministries have sent people, say to a company working in that area to understand really how is the business getting done. And I see value in it, because I see value in it. I mean, I spent a year in the corporate sector, and for me it was like a real life MBA degree. And I only wish, if I could have done it maybe midway through my career. I may not have got it at that level, but I certainly, the learnings of that 1 year, I would honestly say today makes me a much better minister, because I have seen from the receiving end, what it is like to be a business in this country, the kind of challenges which business faces with the bureaucracy, and therefore when it comes to something as important which Amitabh mentioned, as easier to do business, it's very helpful to in a sense be on, at least have some understanding of both sides of the issue. And sometimes I would say, because even within the government there is a range of specializations, today's world demands a kind of hybridization. It demands a hybridization because probably, when 9/11 happened in the US, there was a 9/11 commission which was set up. The biggest flaw they found, the real problem they found, was not that the American system did not know what was coming. What the American system had was bits of pieces of what was coming, and there was no practice, there was no agency, there was no culture of putting it together. So silos are the most formidable obstacle really for good decision making and better delivery. And here I would say in reforming bureaucracy, in making it more effective, there is actually a case for greater cross-fertilization, to some degree, I would say greater hybridization. I know in different domains it will take different forms, but certainly the domain that I am more familiar with, I can say that we have in the foreign ministry, we've had for some years now, military officers who are deputed there. Now they are enormously useful. They are enormously useful because they bring to bear a lot of military insights. It's somebody who's actually dealing with a political military issue. May never have actually directly experienced. And I would say again, I'm drawing on my own experience. I spent 2 years with the Indian peacekeeping force during Op Pavan, attached to them as the political advisor, and it greatly, I would say, strengthened my understanding of how the armed forces work, their way of actioning issues, and again, much later in life, it's been something which has been very useful. Now, there are other issues, not a surprise, issues like integrity or right-sizing the bureaucracy, or the whole issue of professional excellence. I think they've all been discussed in the book. There are references to this one big issue in bureaucracy, that is seniority. Where how do you get a balance between seniority and merit? And I think again, to me, this will be a perennial challenge. But that doesn't mean the system should not come up with a solution. One part of it is, something like deep selection, which is you do not necessarily follow a seniority list, but you broaden out. And again, in the last decade, that has happened. Certainly at senior levels, bands of candidates are considered rather than a single year of selection. But the real challenge here is even that is not really rewarding performance. So the heart of the bureaucratic delivery issue is, what do you get if you perform well? Why would I perform well if I don't get anything for performing well? Now, I still think people will perform well. I don't think they're doing it necessarily for a reward. But I would say the culture of performing well would certainly be strengthened. And therefore, I would say one of the challenges really in administrative reform is to put positive incentives for performance, rather than say, okay, I have a given set of people, I might go a little bit deeper to pick the more capable ones. That, in my view, is not in itself adequate. And in case people think it's difficult, and it is difficult, I must tell you, I just would make the point that today, if I were to look at the top 25 most important countries for India and the world, those are not necessarily the places where my top 25 senior people are. So we have made a conscious decision to actually, shall I say, reward performance by fast-tracking people or giving them greater responsibility within the constraints of what the system allows. The other issue, of course, which is a perennial in any bureaucratic debate, is just like what is the possibility of rewarding performance, there's the other flip side of it. What is the cost of a delay or a non-decision? That playing safe keeps you safe, but there is a systemic cost to playing safe. And how do we build that into our system? My own experience, I would like to say, in all honesty, in the last decade, in government has been very different from the previous 3.5 decades. I see a lot of innovation, I see a lot of new practices, in a sense almost the beginnings of a change of culture. And I'd share with you some of the examples. One is something which some of you may have heard of called Pragati. Pragati is actually an online, I would say, what would you call it, Amitabh? Inspection or a questioning? Yeah, so projects are listed and secretaries are then quizzed by the Prime Minister online in front of all other secretaries, which by the way is a very useful psychological management technique, about why a particular project or a particular issue is delayed or cost overrun, or what are the obstacles. And I would say it's had a very significant impact on actually project performance. In fact, it's had such a significant impact. I mean, I can certainly tell you a lot of our projects which are pending abroad for years, many of them came to much sharper outcomes. And the practice was so good, certainly, and I suspect some other ministers now do that as well. Many ministers do what we call an internal Pragati. We don't even wait for the Prime Minister to do a national Pragati. We kind of do our own projects and do our own sort of samiksha of that. But the impact of it, I must tell you, I mean, sometimes the Prime Minister jokes that just putting a project on the agenda itself has the impact of making the project move faster. The second is something which all of you have experienced. This is passports. Think back 10 years ago, how long it took for your passports to arrive. And I'll tell you why it took so long. 10 years ago, we had 77 centers, kendras, to take in passport applications and then process them. Today we have 522. And our objective at the minimum is to have at least one per Lok Sabha constituency. We are close to it. My aim after that is to also have one in every district, because some Lok Sabha constituencies are more than a district. Now, it isn't just that we have more centers. It may interest many of you, because this has happened less in cities, so many of you would not know this. In many cases, the centers are not new buildings and new staff that we took. We actually are using post offices and postal employees who are underworked because people write less letters today to actually process passport applications. Now we have an understanding between the Foreign Ministry and the Department of Post. They even get a revenue share of our passport fees. But what it has done is, it has actually dramatically shrunk the passport issuance. An external variant of it is actually this Indians getting stuck outside. Now, the most, I would say, the cutting edge example of that is actually, the minister responding to individual Twitter complaints. But I'll give you the systemic backbone as well, because obviously at the end of the day you want a system to run 24/7. And we started 10 years ago an online portal of grievances, which is anybody stuck anywhere, anybody who has a problem anywhere. It's called Madad. And Madad has been, from people getting lost passports to attestation to I need a lawyer, I lost my wallet, the police is not registering my complaint in some country. It's actually a very interesting mix of the three objectives of Karma Yogi. The three objectives of Karma Yogi are: align bureaucracy with national priorities, make it citizen-centric, and use technology tools. Now, if you take examples like this, where you actually go online where even today, in the field of passports, for example, verification, applications can be done from anywhere. Verification is much faster because there's actually a mobile verification process. Even the police have come online for the verification. So these, to my mind, are some examples of what is changing. The COVID, again, was for us a stress test. A stress test which, to my mind, actually showed how well our bureaucracy performed. Bureaucracy performed outside the country, inside the country. As a frequent traveler, probably the most frequent traveler, when I go around and see, it's not just the vaccine production. When you look at the vaccination programs of different countries, you can actually see which bureaucracy has delivered where and which bureaucracy has not. And it's amazing how many bureaucracies actually failed. So now, again, I'm sharing the experience which we have, which is really the idea of, say, getting back people. And we got back almost 70 lakh people from abroad as part of Vande Bharat mission. Or look beyond that, something like what we call today our first responder operations. The one in Ukraine is most well known, Operation Ganga, which brought back a lot of students. But just see what happened recently in Turkey. When the Indian system, that same bureaucracy which everybody complains about, within 24 hours is able to go to a foreign country and set up a medical hospital and treat patients there and pull out people from under the rubble. I think all of you have to accept something has changed. So I do believe that issues regarding bureaucracy, administration, governance, they need to be debated. They need, it's important. We keep challenging, we keep questioning, we look at examples of other countries. But at the same time, I think it's also important to recognize many of the changes. Yes, nobody would dispute that systems, at the end of the day, the system needs to change. But systems eventually are human beings. So unless we put that emphasis on human resource potential, its development, its training, and I must say, usually most people my age and stage, you tend to say naturally, in our times it was like this, and now look at these people who are coming. I would say in all candor, I find today's intake of people to be far more independent. In many ways, a lot of them are not there with the first jobs. They are more experienced. In interesting ways, I see a much broader spread. When we get into this, does democracy work in India debates? The three examples I cite of how well democracy works in India are the composition of the parliament, the composition of the cricket team, and the composition of the bureaucracy. So look at how much more diverse all of them have become. I do believe today that the quality of delivery, when you look at the yojanas which are underway. The yojanas, we are actually today creating a social welfare state in this country. And nobody has created a social welfare state of $2,000 per capita. That today our food delivery, our financial payments, our health programs, our house, the Awas Yojana to provide housing, the unsecured loans which we give, whether by Mudra or Swanidhi. There are today a range of programs which are actually changing the socio-economic landscape of India. Now that's great, but none of that would happen if the bureaucracy actually wasn't there to plan it, to chart it, to deliver it, to monitor it, to change it. So as you know, when I think of bureaucracy, I will end with something which my predecessor as External Affairs Minister told me, Sushma Swaraji. You have these rankings which newspapers and India Today and all these people do. Don't take it seriously, but still, it's nice to be ranked sometimes. So she was ranked, I think the first year, 2015, she was ranked #1 among the ministers. And then I had come in as Foreign Secretary, and there was an article about me, which was essentially the sum and substance of it was that I was getting a kind of a inside track, if you would. And I still remember she sent me a note which said, from the #1 minister to the #1 secretary, remember, any ministry is as good as the minister-secretary combination. So I say that to you because to me, this, having today, I'm now looking at it as a politician. The future of our country is very much dependent, as of many other countries, really how well the politics and the steel frame work together. And I can say this from a decade of experience. I think this Prime Minister has an enormous trust in the bureaucracy. He really, and actually Mission Karmayogi itself is proof of that he sees it as absolutely indispensable to realize the ambitions and the aspirations that all of us have for the country. So on that happy note, once again, I want to say it's a great privilege to join you all today, and I congratulate you, Mr. Vinod Rai, on this book, and may you keep writing more, hopefully without any defamation cases.
Thank you so much, sir. On behalf of Rupa Publications India, Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, and Mr. Vinod Rai, I would like to thank Dr. Jaishankar for gracing us with his presence today. I would also like to thank Mr. Amitabh Kant, Dr. Prajapati Trivedi, and Professor Iqbal Singh for being part of the launch. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank each one of you for lending your support to the book. Thank you so much for being present here. Copies of the book are available for sale outside, and Mr. Rai would be happy to sign them for you. Thank you so much.